Okay, now we're going to use this statistical software called SPSS. It's a very common software used in psychology and sociology. It's widely used in many colleges and research facilities, so that's the one we're going to teach you, although there are others out on the market out there. So the trickiest part of SPSS, one of the trickiest parts I should say, is entering the data. You have to do it in a very specific way. The second tricky part is reading the outputs, but we'll get to that a little later. So in this session, we're just going to teach you how to enter the data. So we're going to use the same data we used in the frat no frat exercise. Okay, and I'll show you how to get this data ready to cut and paste right into this data sheet, SPSS data sheet, in a minute. But first of all, you have to go on to a computer that has this. Okay, and all the campus computers have this loaded on. The majority of the computer lab computers, certainly the library has it loaded on it. Okay, so make sure you have this IBM SPSS. IBM owns it, so if you're looking for it in a file somewhere, a program file, it's going to be under IBM, not SPSS. Once you find it, depending on what version you have, opening it can do a couple things. The latest version will do something like ask you for Unicode coding. Just say yes, you want to use Unicode coding. And then you open a new data file. Another version, the version I'm using, which is version 20, prompts you what do you want to do, and you say you type in the data. Ultimately, you want to get to opening a new data file somewhere. Okay, so the prompts shouldn't be that confusing, but there are some differences between them. Once you do that, you should get to a blank data window like this. Let me go over to the desktop. I have SPSS loaded on as an icon on my desktop. If it's not in there, it could be in your program files. So you just double click on that, and here's version 20 coming up, and here's what it says. What do you want to do? And I say I just want to type in the data. Okay, I click on that. Boom. Now this screen might look a little different than yours. I increased the font size so it's easier to view in the video that I'm making right here. But this opens up what's called data view. You have data view and variable view. All right, let's go back to our lesson. So we have a window like this, as we just saw. But in order to enter data, it turns out we don't enter the actual data in first. We have to identify the data first. We have to go into the variable view and talk about our variables. Identify them first. So we'll go to variable view in a minute here, but let me show you what we're going to do. So we have to enter the data for this study we're doing. And you always have an ID number or participant number you want to enter, because that keeps track of your data. We're going to have one independent variable, whether they're in the fraternity or not. We're going to have two dependent variable questions, the continuous one and the categorical one. So if we were to make categories for our data, ID is simply a shorter phrase than participants, so I like it to keep my columns nice and narrow as possible so I can see all my data in one screen grab. ID, frat would be our independent variable, drinks would be our continuous dependent variable, and problem would be our categorical dependent variable. Okay, so we can do that. Now once we plug those in there, it's going to have a host of different columns. There's type and width and decimal and label and value. SPSS has a default that should work for us for most of these right here. Values we're going to have to deal with in a minute, but let's talk about it. Type of data asks if it's numerical, interval or ratio, or string, categorical, nominal, ordinal. So we can designate those if we need be, but I'll show you when we get over to the data. Then the last thing we got to do, could be a little tricky, is labeling the values for some of our data. As I mentioned earlier, the frat no frat category was designated as zeros and ones, and those are codes. So we got to tell the computer what a 0 is and what a 1 is. Likewise, in our categorical dependent variable, the problem was coded as 0 and 1, and it meant no and yes respectively. So we have to tell the computer to label that. So we'll do those labels in a minute. Let's go back to SPSS then. Alright, so we got to go to variable view first, and the first one we want to type in is ID. Notice that the defaults come in instantly, and then frat, that's going to be our independent variable, and then drinks our continuous dependent variable, and problem. Okay. Now frat is a string. It is categorical because we coded it 0 and 1, and so is problem. Okay? But you don't need to mess with this or this or this, but when we get to values, we do have to label it. So in frat, we want to label 0 as non-frat or no frat. We're going to add it, and 1 as frat. Add it. Press OK. And problem, we want to label 0 as no, and 1 as yes. That's it. That's all you got to do. Our data should be fine. You shouldn't have to mess with any of these down here. Okay? Now let's go back to data view. Now we're ready to enter our data. Now to enter our data, we have to go to our Excel file. This is what I want to show you how to do to enter the data. So we grab what we worked on last time, making this graph, and this is what I suggest you do. You grab the whole thing, clicked up in this box up here, and copy it. Control C I use to copy. Then we go to sheet 3, and I'm just going to copy this entire thing, just like that. I'm going to change the view again because it helps with the filming of this video, so I make it larger. And what we want to do is get rid of this. We don't need this. Let's get rid of the graph. We want to get rid of this. I just do Control D to get rid of those. We want to get rid of this middle value right here. Right click, delete. Okay, and let's get rid of all these. We're cleaning up our data so we can enter it into SPSS. Okay, and let's just put these back in order. Remember, we sorted, and now let's sort them. I'm going to sort them by column B so the numbers are all right. Data, sort, and I'm going to sort by column B this time, smallest to largest. There you go. Now our numbers, so now we have our original data all back. You see that? Now we don't want to bring these labels in, so I'm just going to grab the, whoops, okay, let's talk a little bit more about the data. So we're going to need this column right here, right? But then we have two columns that represent frat. We don't need both of them. We just need one of them that says 1 is a frat. So that's this column right here. So I'm going to get rid of this column, right click and delete it. The drinks column is good by itself. And then we need another column right here that says yes is 1 and no is 0. So here's this column right here. So we got to get rid of this column too. I hope that makes sense. In Excel we have two columns that represent our data, but in SPSS we only need one for problem and only need one for fraternity, the independent variable. Now we're going to grab all this data like this. We're going to copy it, and we're going to go to our SPSS file, and we're going to paste it right in. There we go. So you don't have to re-enter the data. The data is already in. And there you go. Now we're ready to do an analysis. We have our data entered. We have our data labeled. We're good to go.